Good morning. I'm Rob. I work for the Vale Glamorgan Council, and I'm going to talk briefly this morning about how we're changing the way in which we work with communities. We think it's a really great example of what sort of 21st century public service could look like. I hope there's some ideas in here that could prompt some discussion today. I suppose what I really hope is there are some ideas shared today that we can learn from to kind of round off parts of this work and inform some of the other things that we're doing. I'll say at the outset, we certainly don't think we've cracked it, but I think we do think we might have worked out part of what it actually is, part of what 21st century public service could look like. And I'm just really keen to work with Lisa, Tony, Owen, and everyone else on the call and who's involved in the group to try and bring people from across the sector together. So public participation, or our Participate programme, is what I'm going to share a bit on. This is really our approach to embedding participation as a way of working in shaping and delivering our services. The vehicle for a lot of this work is the delivery of our public participation strategy. It's one of those things where, there was a legislative driver behind it, but we really sort of took the opportunity to consider that kind of what if, it I suppose was in some ways fortunate. This came around in that kind of moment between, you might remember, it felt like a very sunny springtime, sort of between COVID and then the total economic meltdown. There was that period of time where it felt like, we could do anything. Actually, we'd achieved so much over the last couple of years that anything really was possible. And that's how we sort of approached this as a programme. And we knew the implementation of it would coincide with a new intake of elected members. There was a real opportunity to change things there. And we knew the pandemic had left us with sort of stronger links with community groups, and actually much stronger links between those groups themselves. So the conditions were right for a bit of a fundamental change. And I guess most importantly, we knew we had to be more responsive to community needs, and that if our ultimate aim was for communities to be more resilient and services to be co-produced and co-delivered, we needed to find better ways of engaging people within that. And we've been discussing for a long time what it meant to be a listening organisation, sort of one where our decisions were more guided by insight. We wanted people to be more represented in decision making. We wanted to give a real voice to those communities from which we seldom heard. And this was our chance. So we leapt into it, and obviously our first thought was, what new mechanisms do we need? What new platforms can we get? Someone dust off the procurement guidelines. Let's see what's out there. And I think that's often the starting point for things, because that idea of doing something is always energizing, isn't it? But the real light bulb moment for us was in recognizing that actually people, our communities, share really valuable insight with us all of the time. There are lots of people who are very keen to tell us what they think. There are lots of people who are keen to tell us how we could better support their community, to tell us how they're supporting the community themselves, tell us how they're making a difference locally. We were being told these things at all levels of the organisation, and we were hearing a lot, but we weren't really doing anything with it. We weren't listening to this insight that was coming in, and that obviously that wasn't a conscious decision. Contrary to what some of our more strident critics on Facebook might have said, we weren't deliberately ignoring what people were telling us. We were just, I suppose, very rigid, very council, very local government, dare I say it, very 20th century public service in how we accepted insight from citizens and how we then used that to shape decisions. So, we did want to hear from people. We wanted to hear from people about how, we could use our transport infrastructure to address climate change. But sometimes we'd only listen to those views if you completed the survey about that was attached to our annual delivery plan. We wanted to hear from tenants about how we could better support them, but we'd only listen if you came to one of our engagement sessions and wrote it on a post-it note, which is not to be dismissive of those as engagement methodologies. They're really effective. We'd always been really proud of our public engagement work, how we varied that for different groups, how we embraced new technology. We were good at it. But I think what we realised is that, yes, we were doing that, and we were so focused on getting those methodologies right, we were actually only paying attention to a really small amount of what people were telling us. So we decided, really, just to open the doors to all of that insight that was coming into the organisation. So we mapped all of the ways, beyond those kind of exercises that I've just spoken about, that people were talking to us. So via our social channels, via our contact centre, via our elected members, directly to our staff when they were out there delivering services. And we looked at how could we capture that? How could we sort of analyse it in some way and put it alongside all the great info that was being gained from that engagement work? And how could we start to share that insight internally? And we took some things that we were already monitoring and analysing and tried to view those through a new lens. So, for example, we'd always had performance data around our website, but we started to think, actually, what did this tell us? Not just about how the site functioned, but about how the people who were using it were interacting with the organisation. And then really we started to try and work at the 100 miles an hour to pull all of that together. And begin to share it internally. That sharing was pretty rudimentary to start with, but we're now finding some really effective ways of packaging all those things together. All of what we're learning, all of that knowledge is now being circulated through a series of internal networks. We have an insight board that's chaired by our chief executive and has both kind of key service leads and those actually on the ground engaging with citizens as part of it. And we're working on, hopefully very soon, introducing sort of shared insight dashboards that blend some of the hard data we've always had with this kind of qualitative information. So that's available to everyone across the organisation, whatever job it is that they do. And that's the sort of digital half of it, and working smarter with that kind of digital insight is a really big part of what we're trying to do. But there's another part of it which I guess is guided by the principle that there will always be an invaluable role for individuals, for people within all of this, and that's for individuals who can connect our organisation with communities in the Vale, and I suppose act as kind of conduits for information back and forth. I mentioned earlier that one of the things we were really focused on was enhancing the role of elected members in this work. And I think we were helped immeasurably by having real sort of political buy-in from the administration for this. We have participation established as a cabinet portfolio and a really passionate and engaged lead in that in Councillor Sivignana. Off the back of that, we were able to establish a new network of elected member champions that look at both kind of key issues within the community, things like social value, poverty, energy, and then another set who were able to, I guess, advocate for those groups that might otherwise be underrepresented in our work. So young people, carers, groups like that who too often don't have a voice. There's a point, I suppose, to make on that, and I'm looking at you, Owen, when I say I suppose we're talking within this group with a degree of a kind of Chatham House element. I wouldn't want to see this necessarily direct quoted against me, but we'd always had roles like that within the organisation, but too often they were titles on reports and in pieces of paper. They weren't meaningful, and we were able to kind of really energise those by, to some extent, making the champions almost accountable for their advocacy. So having proper forums in which they were to bring this insight forward, challenge officers, challenge decision makers, what we were doing in those areas, and it's totally re-energized the whole thing. Corporately, we look now at how we can equip those champions, but also all of our elected members with what they need to actually go out and have meaningful discussions with people on these sorts of issues. So all the information, the knowledge they need to support that, and clear routes back into the organisation to feed in those views. So as well as making those champion roles meaningful, we're kind of more directly linking communities into the democratic process. And the next area of our work, and the one that we've sort of most recently begun working on, is then changing the dynamic of how we work with those kind of third sector organisations that advocate for groups primarily with protected characteristics in the Vale. Again, we'd always had forums in which we'd consult with those groups, where sort of typically we'd share our understanding of issues and ask for their views on policies we were putting in place to address that. And earlier this month, we've made the offer to those groups in the Vale to totally turn that on its head and ask them to start bringing their insight to us and challenge us as an organisation. What are we doing to address those things? What are we doing to respond to that? And we know absolutely those are the organisations that will enable us to reach those who too often we don't. And I guess the theme that runs through all of this, we want to stop talking to them and start listening to what it is that they can tell us. And I guess that takes me on to my sort of final example of what we're doing, which is my current obsession, which is around social listening. So we're doing a really in-depth piece of work at the moment to map all of the sort of online spaces in the Vale of Glamorgan where people come together, so we can tap into those discussions and hopefully use that insight to better plan our services. In time, the dream is that we can start entering into a bit of a dialogue with people for those groups as well. 10 years ago, we probably have been convening, town hall meetings to speak to people about local issues, but it's 2023, and you know what? Hundreds of people come together every evening in Facebook groups and WhatsApp chats and lots of other forums to share what they think about their communities. A big part of my role is working with social media, and I can assure you that if you look hard, and you do have to look hard for it at times, but there are still some very positive discussions taking place online. And a lot of these are often sort of single issue groups where you see people united by a desire to enact some sort of change. Those people, for lots of reasons, we feel might have moved away from organisations like ours. And I guess our big hope is that by first learning to sort of listen to what drives those discussions, we can then start to adapt our thinking in line with it. So that's what we've been doing. I've referenced there really just a handful of actions we've undertaken over the last year or so to implement our Participate programme. I know time is very tight this morning, so we probably don't have space for a Q&A after this, but I'll share my contact details, and I'm very happy to catch up with anyone after the session who wants to talk about any of this in more detail. I think the point that I'm trying to make is, in the Vale, we recognised that we needed to fundamentally change what were quite well-established ways of working, and that we had to do that very quickly. And I hope that sort of tallies with some of the discussion that we're going to have today. And I hope it does that in two ways. Firstly, there is a wealth of insight out there that's available to us as public sector organisations, and I think we do just have to concentrate on finding the right ways to listen to that. Collaboration, co-production, community participation, all the things that we talk an awful lot about, and there are great examples of it across the sector. It's very much my belief and my experience that they don't require a huge resource commitment if we're savvy in how we approach those. Most importantly, if we're willing to quickly drop things that aren't working, we can move to doing new things very quickly. And secondly, and I suppose maybe more importantly, there are lots of things that we've done in the last 12 months that we'd spoken about for years. At some level, we always knew there were better ways of working. What we now recognise, and I'm sure what people in this session recognise, is that, dare I say, the time to sit and talk about those ideas has passed. We're very much now at the stage where we need to start implementing them and innovating at speed. I'm sure I don't need to tell anyone about what's going on across the public sector, about how the way organisations are being forced to change very quickly, the way the needs of the communities that we serve are changing very quickly. But I do think that this sort of approach to insight and participation is part of what 21st century public service can look like, part of how 21st century public servants could work. And that's why I'm here today, I suppose, to share that and try and learn from other people's views. And I guess to round it off, I suppose I'm also here because I do think that the real potential for improving public services lies not just in individual organisations improving the way in which they work, but actually all of us pulling together towards some shared goals. You know, what underpins all of what I've spoken about there is citizens engaging with public services in a different way. Ultimately, it'll be them receiving public services in a different way. I think for that to work at scale, we all have to move together. You know, that there's going to be no one size fits all approach this for organisations, but there has to be some consistency, I think, across Wales in citizens' experience of using the public sector. You know, that's what's going to shape people's expectations and ultimately ensure that the work that we're all trying to do has the most impact. So I think we need those shared objectives to shape future ways of working, something that we can shape together and buy into together. I think that's what the 21st Century Public Service Programme can offer us. You know, and that's why I and the organisation that I work for are throwing our weight behind the programme, so we can equip ourselves and our colleagues with the skills that we need for the future. And hopefully at the end of this, when Lisa makes her call to action, we might have a few more people to sign up to that endeavour as well. So thank you very much, Diolch yn fawr, for listening. And I think, Owen, I'm handing it back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Rob. Your passion is very clear to all of us. And thank you for sharing that. A couple of those anecdotes around the movement from hearing to listening. I particularly liked the addition of that social listening as well. Yeah, really appreciate that. And I think you've kicked us off perfectly in terms of our thought process. Good news, Rob, is we have got a minute or two for a question, and we do have a question or two. So we'll see what we can manage in the time that we've got allotted. So based on one of your last points, actually, Rob, there's a question from Avril in the chat. How have you encouraged staff to drop things that weren't working anymore and move to this new way of working?
It's a good question, and one of the things that's been really effective in driving this is a lot of it has been driven at, and it wouldn't be my preferred choice of words, but a kind of a lower level, if you like, within the organisation, where I think to some extent we've had practitioners involved who are really enthusiastic about doing things and are maybe not encumbered with some of the baggage around moving away from well-established processes. Does that make sense? So they haven't necessarily been advocating for something for a long time in the way that you know, we often need to. It's almost like it's not their thing to defend. Do you get what I mean? And that's been really useful in maybe challenging how things haven't worked before. And there is something, and you know, it's hard to put a point on it, but I think the pandemic did change the culture within the organisation, where actually that, you know, it very much felt like there was no time to lose on a lot of things. So do you know what? If it didn't work, we just moved on. It wasn't a case of taking things to various forums and writing reports, etc., etc. We just dropped it and tried something new the next day, and that has carried on within the organisation. Yeah, so I think those are the two factors that have helped guide that.
Thank you very much, Rob. And just to get our money's worth, we'll go for another question, if that's okay. How important has political leadership helped with the speed of innovation and change?
It has been really important. And I mentioned in the presentation there that the sort of the new intake of members and the change in administration last year, it brought, I think, both a kind of a political driver, which, to be honest, is always important within organisations like ours. It's something that the leader and the cabinet member responsible feel really strongly about, very much wanted to challenge us as an organisation to improve on. But it also just brought, I guess, a bit of a breath of fresh air. Do you know what I mean? We had different people talking about different ideas, and that brought a real energy to this work. And the other thing I would say, it probably brought a closer working relationship between some officers and elected members, which is not to say that those things weren't working well in the past, but actually having some new faces around the table, speaking openly around new ideas, it did maybe help reset some of those relationships. So it became a bit of a, I guess, a bit of a more open sharing of views. And again, that just leads to that or removes that reticence to stop doing things that we've always done. Again, just gave people that license to change.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Rob. Appreciate that.